Imagine, just for a moment, that you've been handed the most monumental, high-stakes assignment in the world.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Right. Your task isn't just to, fix a broken policy or balance a budget. Your task is to rebuild a nation's entire legal, social, and political foundation completely from scratch.
From absolute zero.
Exactly. How do you even begin? How do you balance the deep, complex healing of historical wounds with the cold, hard practicalities of setting up a government that actually functions for you and your fellow citizens on a daily basis?
It's a massive thought experiment.
It is. And welcome to today's deep dive, where we are going to explore exactly that kind of blueprint.
And, in the case of the material we're looking at today, it's much more than just an exercise in theory. It is a highly detailed, deeply serious proposal attempting to engineer a brand new reality.
Absolutely. So the focus of our deep dive today is a 35-page document drafted back in October of 2019. It was put together by a group called the Eritrean Sinit Study Group, or the ESSG.
Right, the ESSG.
And the document is titled Proposal Constitution for Transitional Period in Eritrea. Our mission today is to extract the core ideas from this text and understand the blueprint this group envisions for a 3-year transitional period.
A very specific 3-year window.
Yeah, a period specifically designed to move Eritrea toward a constitutional, democratic government.
And to provide a little context for you as we begin, this document is a really compelling look at the mechanics of transitional justice and state building. It's trying to answer how a society pivots from its current state into a completely new framework.
Which is never easy.
Never. Now, it is crucial to note right up front that the sources we are analyzing contain highly politically charged proposals regarding the current administration in Eritrea.
Yes, very important to state.
As always, our goal here is to impartially examine the ESSG's ideas exactly as they're written in the text. We aren't taking any political sides, nor are we endorsing these viewpoints. We are simply acting as your guides to unpack the ideas contained in this original source material.
We are just here to read the architectural plans, not to buy the building. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with Chapter 1 of the proposal.
The foundational stuff.
Right. Because before you can build a state, you have to define what the state actually is. The document starts by explicitly defining the territory of Eritrea. And they don't leave this up to philosophical interpretation.
No, they are very literal.
They anchor it strictly to international rulings. Specifically, they cite the 2002 Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission decision and the 1998 Eritrea-Yemen Maritime Delimitation by the Permanent Court of Arbitration.
So they are drawing a very firm line in the sand regarding borders recognized by international law.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, anchoring the state's identity to international law right out of the gate is a strategic move to establish immediate global legitimacy.
Exactly.
But what happens inside those borders is where the ESSG proposal gets really structural. They emphasize a massive shift toward decentralization. The proposal envisions a civic nation.
To civic nation, yes.
Let's define that for the listener, because civic nation sounds like, well, it sounds like political jargon. What does that actually look like in practice here?
That's a great question. So a civic nation is one where the state's identity is based on shared citizenship and democratic principles, rather than being tied to one specific ethnic, religious, or linguistic group.
It levels the playing field.
Right. It doesn't elevate one culture over another. To achieve this, the ESSG proposes dividing power not just across the 3 standard branches of government, the legislative, executive, and judiciary, but also geographically across 9 administrative regions.
And those 9 regions aren't just randomly drawn lines on a whiteboard either. The proposal specifically reverts to the de facto administrative districts from 1952, plus the capital city of Asmara.
The 1952 borders.
Yeah, so you've got Akelaguzai, Barka, Denkalia, Gash Setit, Hamasin Sahel, Semhar, Sinhit, Saray, and of course Asmara.
That 1952 reference carries a lot of historical weight. 1952 was the year Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia under a United Nations mandate.
A very different era.
It was a period where Eritrea had its own constitution, parliament, and a degree of autonomy, before that autonomy was progressively stripped away. By reverting to those specific boundaries, the drafters are reaching back to a time before decades of conflict.
Kind of hitting the undo button on the map.
Exactly. They are signaling a return to a recognized historical framework for local governance.
That makes a lot of sense. It reflects a guiding principle you see repeated throughout the text: unity and diversity. They're trying to build national harmony by acknowledging the distinct regions rather than trying to blur them all together into one monolith.
And we also see this in their approach to language.
Yes, languages.
Yeah.
The proposal establishes both Tigrinya and Arabic as the official languages of the state, but it also guarantees that all population groups have the right to use their own languages in dealing with public authorities or for educational and religious purposes.
Speaking of religion, the document takes a very firm stance on the separation of religion and state.
It's very strict.
It mandates that the state must treat all citizens equally without preferential treatment for any religion or for non-religion. But there is a highly specific, very practical rule attached to this.
The financial rule.
Right. The ESSG dictates that religious institutions must operate with absolute accountability and transparency. Specifically, all foreign aid and finances flowing to religious groups must be declared.
Down to the last dollar.
Yes, and there would be a state transparency agency dedicated to ensuring these rules are followed.
That feels incredibly targeted. Why would a transitional constitution concern itself so deeply with the accounting ledgers of a local church or mosque?
It highlights the drafters' awareness of how foreign funding can sometimes be leveraged to create internal instability.
Oh, I see.
In a fragile transitional period, unmonitored money flowing from outside actors into religious institutions can easily become a proxy for political influence. They are trying to protect that civic nation concept from external interference.
That's fascinating. Another aspect of how they define this new state is their mandate for affirmative action, or, as they term it, positive discrimination.
Article 10.
Right. Article 10 explicitly mandates that preferential provisions in economic and educational development be given to underprivileged regions and social groups. It's not just a vague promise of equality.
No, it's a structural requirement to help less developed areas catch up.
And it specifically calls out addressing gender inequality and imbalance. They make it a constitutional duty to integrate women fully into the mainstream of economic development.
Which transitions us perfectly into how this document handles fundamental rights. They are balancing the universal philosophical rights you expect in a constitution with very immediate practical actions designed to correct perceived historical injustices.
When you read Chapter 3, it reads like a standard, robust, democratic constitution. You have the right to life, liberty, human dignity, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, the right to peacefully assemble.
All the staples of a democracy.
But they place a huge emphasis on due process. They explicitly include the right to a writ of habeas corpus.
Let's break down why that specific legal mechanism is so crucial here. Habeas corpus is essentially your right to challenge unlawful detention.
You can't just be vanished.
Exactly. The document states that anyone arrested must be informed of the grounds for their arrest and brought to a court within 48 hours.
48 hours. That is a tight window.
It is. If the arresting officer can't provide a valid legal reason within that window, the court is obligated to order the prisoner's release.
For you listening, think about how vital that is in a post-authoritarian transition. In systems where arbitrary detentions, or holding people indefinitely without charges, might have been the norm, putting a strict 48-hour clock on the state's power to hold you is a massive shift.
It forces the justice system to prove it has a legitimate reason to detain a citizen immediately.
Those are the universal rights. But where this document becomes a unique blueprint for transitional justice is how it moves from those broad philosophies to surgical interventions regarding the past.
Oh.
For example, consider how they handle property and land.
The land issue is huge.
Their proposal calls for the creation of a land commission. But this isn't just a municipal zoning board deciding where to put a new road or a stop sign. Its mandate is to review all forms of violations regarding land appropriation, land confiscation, and unlawful distribution enforced by the current regime, or formerly by Ethiopian occupations.
They establish a very specific legal philosophy for this commission to follow. Land within a community's original habitat, whether collectively or individually owned, is considered the rightful property of that community.
Meaning they look at history, not just current deeds.
Right. Any form of land ownership has to conform to the traditional norms and customary laws historically accepted by that society.
Let's translate that for the listener. In other words, they are saying the central government can't just draw lines on a map from a desk in the capital city. They have to actually respect how local communities have managed their own land for centuries.
Which is a huge decentralization of power.
If a community has a historical way of sharing grazing land, The new state laws have to bend to accommodate that tradition rather than overriding it.
Exactly. They are proposing a massive, structured unwinding of decades of centralized land policy. And the push for accountability doesn't stop at the physical borders of the country either.
No, it crosses oceans.
The ESSG proposal demands the creation of a specific committee tasked with investigating properties or funds invested outside the country in the name of the current ruling party or in the name of individuals serving as officials of the present administration.
Tracking down offshore finances sounds like an incredibly complex job for an interim government that is only supposed to exist for 3 years.
It's a tall order.
But it underscores how they view the transition. It's not just about writing new laws. It's about recovering what they view as national wealth. Now, moving from the monopoly on wealth to the monopoly on force, let's look at another major institution they want to completely overhaul.
The military.
Yes, the military. The proposal demands that the defense and security forces be entirely restructured. The goal is to make the military reflect Eritrean diversity and professionalism across all ranks.
They explicitly state that the forces must be totally neutral, free from any influence or membership in any political party, and accountable only to the interim constitution.
The word neutral feels like the operative word there.
It is doing a lot of heavy lifting. In many states emerging from prolonged single-party rule, the military and the ruling party are deeply intertwined.
Sometimes they are almost indistinguishable.
Right. The ESSG is proposing a clean, surgical separation. The military's doctrine, they state, must be redefined so its loyalty is solely to the country and the people, not to any political entity or ideology.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at how this transitional government is supposed to run day to day, you realize you aren't just reading a finished set of rules.
No, you're reading the debates.
You're reading the internal debates of the ESSG itself. They couldn't agree on every single mechanical detail, so they literally left multiple choice options right there in the text for the eventual transitional assembly to decide.
It's a remarkably transparent look at the difficulties of power sharing. You rarely see this in a published constitutional proposal. Let's look at the National Assembly, the legislative branch.
The parliament.
The document states it will have between 50 and 70 members serving a 3-year term, but then they offer 2 distinct options for how those members are chosen.
Option A is straightforward, pure democracy. The assembly is composed entirely of representatives elected by the people.
Simple enough.
But option B is a hybrid model. It suggests an assembly made up of elected representatives, plus representatives of opposition political groups, civic societies, and what they call national icons and professionals.
And those proportions would be decided by an election commission.
Right.
Option B is a classic transitional justice mechanism. It acknowledges that after a long period without democratic elections, a purely elected body might not immediately capture all the vital voices.
Because some people haven't been able to campaign.
Exactly. Think about long-standing opposition figures or civil society leaders who might have been operating in exile for decades. They might not have the immediate grassroots machinery to win a local election, but their voices are considered essential for national reconciliation.
It's a way to ensure broad coalition building during a fragile window.
And once that assembly is sitting, the document insists on radical transparency. The minutes of the National Assembly meetings must be publicly available, and their deliberations have to be televised live.
They want you, the citizen, to see every debate, every compromise, and every vote as it happens.
Now, what about the executive branch? The group had another multiple-choice scenario here.
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure for nation building. Option A for the executive is a single president, elected from among the members of the National Assembly. Option B is a presidential council composed of 3 members.
A triumvirate?
Whether it's 1 person or 3, they serve a 3-year term. But here is the critical restriction. Whoever holds that executive power during the transition is explicitly banned from seeking office or being appointed to any branch of government at any level after the 3-year interim period ends.
That is a brilliant mechanism.
Isn't it?
It is designed to remove the incentive for the transitional leader to use their temporary power to rig the permanent system in their favor. If you know you cannot hold office in the final government, your only legacy is how well you manage the transition itself.
It's an engineered enforcement of selflessness.
It really is.
It's like a referee who is hired to completely clean up a corrupted sport, but as a condition of the job, they have to sign a legally binding contract banning them from ever playing in the league once the new rules are set. Their only job is to get the game running fairly.
That's a great analogy. Now, because transitions can be volatile, the document does grant the president the power to declare a state of emergency, but it comes with heavy chains attached.
Very heavy chains.
The president can declare it, but it requires a two-thirds majority vote from the National Assembly to actually approve it. And even then, it maxes out at 6 months.
So they can't just declare it and leave it forever.
No, the Assembly has to keep reapproving it if it needs to go longer, and they can revoke it at any time. Think about what it means when an executive is forced to constantly justify emergency powers to an independent legislature. It prevents emergency from becoming a permanent state of governance.
If you think about everything this transitional government has to do, fixing complex land disputes, tracking down offshore funds, restructuring an entire military doctrine, it's way too much for 50 people sitting in the Legislative Assembly.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine being handed the job of fixing an entire society's physical infrastructure and its collective psychological trauma at the exact same time. It's impossible.
What's fascinating here is how the proposal delegates that immense burden. Chapter 8 of the document establishes a series of specialized independent commissions.
Task forces.
They are essentially engineering a new society by creating specific task forces to target specific societal wounds.
Let's look at the most intense of these. The Peace, Reconciliation, and Transitional Justice Commission. The text says it is essential for Eritreans to go through a process of healing to overcome the negative effects of injustice.
Healing is central.
This commission is tasked with investigating post-independence atrocities, gathering facts, and making compensation for material loss. But the text goes even further, doesn't it?
Yes, and this is where we must again remind you listening that we are just imparting the views of the ESSG document without endorsing them.
Strictly neutral.
We're just reporting the text. The text explicitly mandates the dissolution of the current ruling party, the PFDJ. It dictates that all financial and other properties under its control must be transferred to the government treasury, and it states that its Central Committee members and other leaders should be banned from any political activities.
Wow.
This is the ESSG's drafted strategy for transitional justice, presented in its most uncompromising form.
Wait, let me stop you there and play devil's advocate for a second. Doesn't that create a massive paradox? We just talked about Chapter 3, guaranteeing freedom of expression, freedom of association, and the right to peacefully assemble.
Right.
How does the document reconcile banning a specific political party and its leaders entirely with those new universal democratic freedoms?
This raises an important question, and it is the central tension of transitional justice anywhere in the world. How do you protect a fragile new democracy from the architects of the previous system?
The paradox of tolerance.
Exactly. The ESSG's implicit argument here is that the former ruling apparatus isn't just a normal political party, but an intertwined state apparatus that must be dismantled to create a level playing field. But you are entirely correct. It creates a deep friction between the philosophical ideals of universal rights and the messy, punitive realities of dismantling an old regime.
On a completely different front, you have the Commission for the Demobilization and Reintegration of National Service Members. For context, the national service in Eritrea hasn't just been an 18-month military stint for the youth.
No, it's been much more than that.
For decades, it has functioned as an indefinite, heavily scrutinized mobilization that essentially defined the entire national economy and the lives of a generation.
Exactly. Demobilizing the national service isn't just a matter of sending soldiers home. It is practically having to invent a civilian labor market from scratch.
That is a staggering logistical challenge.
This commission is designed to take men and women out of military structures and provide them with educational and business opportunities. Reintegration is critical to stability.
Because if you don't,
if you simply release a massive population without jobs or prospects, you are creating a marginalized group, which is a classic recipe for post-conflict disaster.
Speaking of the economy, there is the National Bank. The proposal insists on granting it strict operational independence. It specifies that the bank's focus should be solely on managing the annual inflation target and managing public debt.
Keeping the money stable.
Interestingly, it explicitly states the national bank should not compete with private banks and financial institutions, but rather regulate them.
Think about what that means for you as a citizen in this proposed transition. By legally forcing the central bank to focus only on inflation, the transitional government is promising not to gamble with the purchasing power of your savings to fund their political projects.
Which happens far too often.
Hyperinflation destroys new democracies before they can even get off the ground. This rule is a structural guardrail against economic collapse, signaling a push toward a more open, private sector-friendly economy.
And finally, there is the commission tasked with doing the ultimate heavy lifting, the National Constitution Commission. Remember, everything we have discussed today is just the rules for the 3-year waiting room.
Just the interim.
This specific commission has the job of conducting civic education, consulting the public broadly, and actually drafting the permanent constitution for the post-transitional era.
They literally have a commission assigned to write their own replacement.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at this 35-page proposal from the ESSG, you see a highly detailed, deeply pragmatic roadmap.
It covers all the bases.
It really does. It is trying to marry lofty democratic ideals with the incredibly messy, on-the-ground reality of transitional justice, wealth redistribution, and deep social healing.
It is a remarkable balancing act, and it's worth pointing out just how desperately the authors want these transitional rules to remain stable while that balancing act takes place.
The amendment process.
The amendment process for this transitional constitution is incredibly strict. If a future assembly wants to change a provision, they need a 3/4 majority vote.
75%.
And that's just step one. After they get that vote, they have to wait an entire year, deliberate again, and then pass it with a 4/5 majority.
A 4/5 majority after a 1-year waiting period. In a government that only exists for 3 years, that basically means it is impossible to change the rules once the clock starts ticking.
They want this blueprint locked in stone to prevent the transitional period from descending into endless debate about the rules of the game. They just want the government to execute the plan.
That rigid structure ensures the focus remains on stabilization and preparation for the permanent state.
Precisely.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. This entire document is designed specifically for a temporary 3-year period. It's an interim step.
A stepping stone.
But if a transitional government fundamentally redesigns land ownership based on customary laws, completely restructures the doctrine of the military, dissolves former political parties, and rewires the national economy to focus on inflation targeting. Wait, sorry, no ellipses. They rewire the national economy to focus on inflation targeting. Can any of those changes truly be considered